All right, welcome everybody. So let's continue with the lesson. It's very short. It's almost done. So here, comparing f of x and g of x, which of the two functions has the lower minimum? So here, let's take a look. Take a second and look at f of x and g of x, and let's go back to the functions. So they look like this, right? So the question is that we have over here. It says which one has the lower minimum, right? So if we look at the graph, which one of these has the lower minimum? It's just f of x, right? F of x has the lower minimum because if you look at the graph, it's just the lowest part of the graph is the minimum. So the minimum for this is -2, and what's the minimum for this? It's +3, okay? That's what the question is saying, the lower minimum, okay? Let's look at h of x and j of x. It's saying which one of these has the higher maximum. So if you look at h of x and j of x, which one has the higher maximum, right? The maximum. So let's see, what's the highest point this graph goes is -4. This one is -1. So it should be this one, j of x. J of x has the higher maximum, okay? So that was just a warm-up for the next part, because this part is a little tricky. So observing this part, it says observing f of x. So let's take a look at f of x very quickly. It's saying, here, let me fold this real quick. I think that would help a lot. Here. And let me do that like this. Okie dokie. Let's take a look at this. So this is f of x, right? And the question is saying, observing f of x, for which interval of the domain is the graph strictly increasing? So what does that mean? When you read, what does this sentence mean? It's when you're reading a graph, notice that we read graphs left to right. So you see, when you read this left to right, this has a positive slope, and it's increasing. This is from left to right. This has a negative slope, and it's decreasing. So let's take a look at this. Here, for which interval of the domain is the graph strictly increasing? So what we need to look at is, if we look at this graph over here, when is the graph only increasing like this, right? Like when is the graph only increasing like this positive slope? Take your time and try and figure it out. Notice that pause the video and try and figure it out, but let's say if you want to see it, notice that from left to right over here, this has the positive slope, okay? So then what we write over here is, how would you show that in interval notation? How do you show that only from here to here it's increasing? And the idea is, notice that what is this x value over here? The x value over here, that x value is -3. So you see, from -3 to positive infinity, the graph is strictly increasing. Okay? Because here from -3 to positive infinity, so everything from here to here, the graph is going up. Well then, what would you say for the other part? Which part of the domain is it strictly decreasing? And always remember that when you're writing a domain, you always put the smallest number to the left and the largest number to the right. So when you look at it over here, notice that this part of the graph has a negative slope, just like this. It has a negative slope from here to here, so the graph is decreasing. But how would you write that in interval notation? Notice that it goes from -3 to -infinity. Like notice from -infinity to -3, the graph is decreasing. Then from -3 to positive infinity, the graph is increasing. And that's how you would do this this one for f of x. What I want you to do is pause the video and try and do the same question for g of x, right? Try and do g of x, take a look at g of x. For which part of this graph is it increasing? For which part of this graph is it decreasing, right? How do you show the domain of it? Just like we did before, okay? Yeah, so let's see. Let's say you pause the video and you want to see the solution. So let's see over here for this graph of g of x. Notice that from here to here, it's increasing. So then what is the domain of this? Notice that what is this x value over here? This x value is 1. Because if you just look at the point over here, this point over here is 1, 3. Okay, so here, what would you say? 1 to infinity, the graph is strictly increasing. And then what would we show over here? Notice that for this part over here, the graph is decreasing. So this is from negative infinity to 1. The graph is strictly decreasing. Okay? Let's try and look at h of x. All right, let's take a look at h of x. Where is my, oh, h of x is on the other side of the paper. Give me a second, let me copy it down. It says, for which interval is the domain strictly increasing for h of x? This one was a little tricky, but the idea is, notice that from left to right, it's never increasing. Because the whole function, when you look at it, it's just going down. So when is it decreasing? It's decreasing for the whole domain of the function. So this is from negative 2. So from negative 2 to positive infinity, the graph is strictly decreasing. Okay? Let's do the last one. So observing j of x, this one wasn't too bad. When is, let's take a look over here. So for j of x, okay. Here, when is the graph increasing? The graph is increasing from left to right. The graph is increasing from negative infinity to what is this x value? It's 1. So just like this, the graph is increasing from negative infinity to 1 over here. It's increasing. Then from 1 to positive infinity, the graph is decreasing strictly. Okay? And that's the lesson. Okay? Wasn't too bad, very straightforward. What I want you to do is, for the next part is, if you're finished with everything before the bell rings, or you're doing this at home or whatever, try and do this homework. And you will really need to use a program called Desmos.com. And what Desmos.com does, you're allowed to graph anything you want. Like if I were to put this into Desmos, it shows you what the graph is. So that will really help you answer some of these questions, okay? So best of luck. I will see you soon in class.